There are moments in life when the ground beneath your feet begins to shift. Nothing seems certain. Patterns break. People leave. You begin to question everything you once believed. And yet, beneath this disorientation lies the quiet whisper of destiny. This is not mere chance. What you call the universe is not some distant impersonal force. It is the language of your deeper nature, of that self which has long waited for your attention. And when it moves, it does not speak in words. It speaks in symbols, in disruptions, in the small tremors that shake the foundations of your current life. Transformation begins in chaos. It does not announce itself with clarity or comfort, but with a slow, often painful unraveling of what once seemed permanent. The life you built, your routines, your ambitions, your sense of self, begins to feel hollow, and what once made sense no longer offers meaning. You feel a rupture, though you might not be able to name it. Something deep within has shifted, and this shift, though disorienting, marks the beginning of a process older than conscious thought itself. The dissolution of certainty is not a flaw or failure, but a necessary stage in the psyche's evolution. This moment is often misunderstood. When a person finds himself surrounded by confusion, emotional intensity, or external loss, the instinct is to resist, to restore the familiar. The ego, which thrives on control and continuity, scrambles to maintain the structures it has spent a lifetime building. But this resistance only deepens the suffering. What is actually occurring is the cracking open of the psychic shell that once contained your identity. The outer chaos mirrors the inner disintegration of a self-image that can no longer hold the full truth of who you are. And yet, in this fragmentation, a new center is forming, a more integrated, authentic version of you that seeks expression. The individual who faces such turmoil stands at the threshold of transformation. What appears as breakdown is often breakthrough in disguise. It is a symbolic death, one that must precede rebirth, just as a seed must decay before it can sprout. The old self must be allowed to perish so that a deeper self can emerge. This is not a linear process. It does not obey the timelines of modern life or the desires of the conscious mind. It follows the rhythm of the soul, which often disrupts rather than conforms. And so the person undergoing this inner shift finds themselves in what might be called the liminal space, the in-between, where they are no longer who they were, but not yet who they are becoming. In this space, suffering becomes meaningful. It is no longer something to be eliminated, but something to be listened to. Pain, confusion, restlessness, these are messages from the unconscious, signaling that the current form of life no longer sustains the deeper truth of the individual. The discomfort is not merely emotional, it is existential. It is the soul's protest against a life lived in exile from its own essence. And so the individual may experience anxiety, depression, loss of motivation, or a sense of inner emptiness. But these states are not simply symptoms to be numbed, they are invitations, invitations to descend into the depths of the psyche and retrieve what was lost, repressed, or never allowed to fully form. The chaos that accompanies transformation is sacred. It clears away the false, the inherited, the superficial. It strips life down to its essentials. And while this stripping can feel brutal, it is also profoundly liberating. The structures that collapse, be they beliefs, relationships, careers, or identities, fall away because they are no longer aligned with the soul's direction. This realignment often happens without conscious choice. The individual does not decide to change in this way. Rather, they are drawn into it by forces deeper than reason. The unconscious has its own intelligence, its own agenda, and when it begins to move, it disrupts the surface life until alignment is achieved. This process cannot be rushed. To be transformed is not to become something new, but to become more deeply oneself. It is a return to essence, not an escape from difficulty. And essence is uncovered not in moments of clarity, but in the willingness to endure confusion without forcing resolution. This is the task, to remain in the fire, not to flee from it. For in that fire, the personality is reshaped. The parts of the self that were hidden or rejected begin to emerge. The shadow, the aspects of the self that were disowned, demands recognition. And with this recognition comes wholeness. But wholeness is not perfection. It is the integration of all parts, light and dark, conscious and unconscious. Chaos, then, is not the enemy of order, but its necessary precursor. Just as nature undergoes cycles of death and renewal, so too does the psyche. Winter gives way to spring, but not without the barren silence of the cold. In the same way, the soul goes through its own winters, and it is in these dark seasons that the seeds of growth are planted. Most people fear this darkness because it defies explanation. It cannot be solved through logic or controlled through willpower. It must be entered into, and this entrance requires courage. The courage to let go of who you think you are, to question the life you have built, and to trust that something greater lies on the other side of unknowing. It is often said that the night is darkest before the dawn, and while this may sound like cliché, it points to a psychological truth. The moment just before transformation often feels like collapse. Everything is in question. The future is unclear. The past no longer fits. But this is the fertile void. It is the space where the new self begins to form, not through conscious effort, but through inner surrender. This surrender is not weakness. It is the recognition that the ego does not have all the answers. It is the humility to allow deeper forces to work through you, to shape you into someone more real, more whole, more alive. Transformation begins in chaos because the psyche is not linear. It is symbolic, fluid, and non-linear. It speaks in dreams, images, and intuitions. And when it begins to shift, it does so in ways that often look like disorder from the outside. But to those who understand the language of the soul, this disorder is revelation. It is the dismantling of the false self, so that the true self can emerge. And though the process is painful, it is also sacred, for it is only in the depths that we come to know our strength, not the strength of control, but the strength of surrender, of integration, of becoming who we were meant to be. The outer world reflects the inner journey in ways that most people overlook, dismissing them as coincidence or randomness. Yet beneath the surface of daily life, there exists a quiet intelligence, one that moves through dreams, symbols, relationships, and even the timing of events. What appears outside us, through experiences, encounters, or repeated patterns, is often a mirror of something taking place within. This mirroring is not literal, but symbolic, and its purpose is not to confirm what the ego already believes, but to bring the unconscious into awareness. Life itself becomes a conversation between the seen and the unseen, the conscious mind and the deeper forces of the psyche. The universe, in this sense, does not operate as a detached or impersonal mechanism, but as a reflective field responding to the psychic needs of the individual with uncanny precision. When a person begins to walk a path of inner development, the world around them subtly begins to change. This is not because reality has altered in some magical way, but because perception shifts. The individual starts to notice things they once ignored. A phrase overheard in a passing conversation suddenly strikes a deep emotional chord. A book falls from a shelf at just the right moment. A stranger speaks a sentence that feels oddly specific to a current inner dilemma. These are not rational phenomena. They are synchronistic, a synchronization between internal psychological states and external events. points to a level of order, deeper than causality. Such moments are not caused in the traditional sense, but they carry meaning, meaning that is intensely personal and often transformative. This reflective process intensifies when one resists the unconscious for too long. When emotions are buried, desires are suppressed, or truths are ignored, the psyche doesn't but remain silent. Instead, it projects these inner conflicts outward, often onto people or situations. A person may repeatedly attract similar kinds of relationships, not because of bad luck, but because something unresolved within is being externalized for confrontation. The outer circumstances force the individual to see what they have refused to face inwardly. Conflict in the external world becomes a symbolic representation of internal division. This is not punishment. It is the soul's way of demanding integration. Dreams operate on the same principle. They are the language of the unconscious, filled with symbols drawn from their individual's own life, yet arranged in patterns that transcend logic. What one dreams at night is deeply connected to what one experiences during the day, but filtered through a deeper logic, one that points to underlying truths. When certain symbols appear repeatedly, be it water, fire, animals, specific people, they are not arbitrary, they carry psychic significance. The more attention a person pays to these inner symbols, the more meaningful the outer world begins to appear. Eventually, the boundary between inner and outer starts to blur, and life begins to feel less like a series of random events and more like an unfolding narrative with psychological depths. This is not to say that every moment in life is filled with hidden meaning. Much of life is mundane, but at crucial points, when a person is on the cusp of change, when something deep within is awakening, the outer world becomes more animated, as if it is responding to an unseen rhythm. In those moments, the world acts as both guide and mirror. Encounters become more intense. Challenges appear that demand internal growth. Symbols emerge in unexpected places. What was once just noise becomes signal, and this signal carries a particular feeling, an emotional resonance that cannot be explained by logic, but is felt unmistakably in the heart and gut. The concept of the universe preparing you is not about fate or supernatural intervention. It is about the way life reflects inner readiness. When a person has done sufficient inner work, facing their shadow, surrendering false identities, and listening to the deeper voice within, the outer world begins to align with this new internal configuration. Opportunities arise not because of luck, but because the person is now attuned to them. The energy that was once scattered in denial or fear becomes available for creation, and the world responds in kind. This is the law of resonance. What is within attracts what is without, not as a rigid rule, but as a dynamic interaction between the psyche and its environment. Symbols in the outer world, whether found in art, nature, or human interaction, often arrive at moments of deep questioning. A butterfly landing nearby may seem insignificant until one recalls that they've been struggling with transformation. A broken object may appear trivial until it occurs in a week filled with emotional rupture. These are not signs to be interpreted like codes, but metaphors to be felt and reflected upon. Their meaning emerges only through dialogue with the self. What does this image stir within? What memory, emotion, or insight does it evoke? In this way, the world becomes a kind of oracle, not one that tells the future, but one that reveals the present more deeply. Intuition plays a central role in perceiving these correspondences. It is not merely a hunch, but a mode of perception that draws from the unconscious. It allows one to sense connections that the rational mind cannot justify. When intuition is trusted, life begins to flow in a more meaningful way. Choices become clearer, not because they are easier, but because they are more aligned with the inner necessity. The universe then is not separate from the individual, but is engaged in constant dialogue with their innermost being. The answers we seek outside often arise when we dare to ask the real questions within. Even suffering becomes part of this reflective process. Painful experiences are not just hardships to endure. They are mirrors of inner fragmentation. They point to where something within remains unhealed, unconscious, or divided. And when we pay attention to what suffering reveals, not just how it feels, we begin to uncover the deeper architecture of the psyche. The external triggers are necessary because they activate what lies dormant. Without them, we would continue in unconscious repetition. With them, we are given the chance to wake up to ourselves. What is often dismissed as external circumstances, more often than not, a symbolic enactment of the soul's journey. The people we meet, the obstacles we face, the roles we play, all carry messages not from outside us, but from the depths within. The more we ignore this, the more chaotic life seems. But when we begin to see the patterns, listen to the symbols, and follow the thread of inner truth, life begins to reveal its intelligence. The universe is not random. It is intimate, psychological, and profoundly responsive to the state of our inner world. What you meet in the world is a reflection of who you are, who you've been, and who you are meant to become. In truth, the signs of the universe is preparing you for something big are never shouted. They are whispered through silence, through patterns, through loss, through longing. What appears as chaos is often the soul rearranging your life to make space for something deeper, truer, more whole. You are not being broken, you are being broken open. The outer world begins to echo your inner world when you are ready to listen, not just with your mind, but with your entire being. Each discomfort, each strange coincidence, each period of solitude is not an accident, but a message, an initiation, a doorway. Walk through it, not with fear, but with the quiet courage of one who knows that something vast and meaningful is unfolding, even if it cannot yet be named. Thank you for walking this path of depth and awareness. It takes strength to look within and even more to stay there. May your journey be guided by the symbols that speak only to you, and may you have the patience to understand them. Good luck on what is not just a change in life, but a transformation of being. Stay true, stay open, and trust the unfolding. You are not lost. You're being led.